Excellent. Okay, well, thank you very much, Nigel and Steve, for the invitation to come and speak to you this evening. Yeah, it's really lovely to speak to you. I think I spoke to Bangor Club many years ago, actually, in the university, perhaps. So it's good to come and chat to you again. So yeah, this evening I'm going to be talking about the red-breeding birds panel mainly, giving some context around Wales, talking about some of our gaps in knowledge, particularly how you can help build that knowledge, and finishing with some examples of some of the sort of the most rare breeding birds we've had here in the UK. So as I said, yeah, that's what I'm going to be talking about. So the idea of wanting to know about rare breeding birds and particularly thinking about the distribution and mapping of rare breeding birds really came about at the time of the first breeding atlas in 1968 to 72. And a subcommittee formed of the RSPB to really think about, when it came to publishing the atlas, how they might plot the distribution of rare birds. So this is an example of honey buzzard here, and you can see actually what they did in that very first atlas was to actually bunch all the records. It's a 100-kilometre square, bunch all the records in the middle. So there's absolutely no way you could know where within that 100-kilometre square honey buzzards were. I mean, since then we've been able to refine methods a little bit, perhaps plotting at 50k or even 20k in the more recent bird atlases. So that's really kind of the origin of the bird atlas, of the red-breeding bird panel. And a paper in British Birds for 1973 talked about the formation of this group, and the aims of the panel were to collect in one place all the information on rare-breeding birds in the UK, so that change and particularly essential information is not lost, as it obviously previously happened to deaths of individuals keeping records secret. And I think that's those aims are still true today, that keeping the records extremely safe and all in one place. Back in 1973, there were just 42 species on the rare breeding birds panel list. So as Nigel mentioned, this year the panel celebrated its 50th year. We've done lots of things to celebrate that, including online conference in March, where we had 2 evenings of some really excellent talks, which you can find on our YouTube channel. We published papers in British Birds and British Wildlife, done a series of blogs, talks and articles for the birding magazines. So I'm going to talk about the rare-breeding bird panel. As I say, it was founded in 1972 with that first report for 1973. It's an independent body, and the funding comes from RSPB and the Joint Nature Conservation Committee, with additional funds from BTO. The panel is made up of volunteers, but there are representatives from the key organisations of JNCC, RSPB and BTO. And the secretary is Mark Eaton. He used to work for the RSPB, but he's been the panel secretary for about 3 years now. So here we are. We had a panel meeting up in Northumberland, where Mark lives, up in October, and it's we meet face to face once a year, and otherwise have our 3 other meetings a year online. So Mark's on the left-hand end, and I'm on the right. Next to me is Andy Stanbury from RSPB, he's the RSPB representative, and in the middle is Helen Baker, who's the JNCC representative, and Mark Holling, David Norman and Ian Fisher are the other 3 independent members of the panel. We're really pleased to welcome Paul Castle to the panel, just in the last couple of weeks actually. Paul's the county recorder for Wiltshire, so he's coming to join us and will bring in a great experience of that county recorder role, and we'll see how it fits into panel in a few minutes. So what we do is actually collate records. We don't collect them, we collate them, and we report on all the data available on rare breeding birds in the UK. And we maintain a secure archive for conservation. I mean, it's secure, so even as chair of rare breeding bird panel, I don't have access to that data set. I see exactly as you see which is the summary published in sort of British Birds. And as Nigel said, we literally just published our 2021 report just at the start of November in British Birds. So what is a rare breeding bird? Well, we define it as a species which has a UK population less than 2,000 pairs. And there's about 80 regular breeding species that fill that definition. I'm just going to go through and talk about these sort of different levels of rare breeding bird, from very rare through to less scarce. And I'm going to start off with very rare breeding birds, which are species with less than 30 pairs breeding in the UK. And the redwings are a really good example of that, with an average of about 24 pairs a year. Redwings really these days primarily nest in Scotland. They used to nest actually in southern England, particularly in Kent, but that population has all but gone now, and Highlands of Scotland is the stronghold. They're likely to be a bit under-recorded because they're nesting in remote areas. I remember just a few years ago here at BTO that we received a letter and a photo from somebody who'd been staying in a holiday cottage in the Highlands, and said there was an unusual bird nesting in a little bush by the front door, and they'd looked in and photographed the nest, and sure enough, they had a redwing nesting in the front shrub of their holiday cottage. So it always pays to be alert, especially if you're on holiday in Scotland. Another example of that very rare breeding bird is the red-backed shrike. Some of you might be around long enough to remember when red-backed shrike still had a fairly regular toehold breeding here in Britain. So through the 70s, it was once a pretty common and widespread species in parts of the UK, but population declined a lot. And through the 70s, you can see here the number of confirmed pairs in the red bars, so up to sort of around 45 pairs in the mid to late 70s, and then that declined rapidly through to sort of the 90s, really, when sort of the last pair was actually here in the Brecks, Santon Down, just up the road here. And then since then, there's been sort of intermittent breeding records. And over the last 10 years, I suppose, there's been breeding records most years spread between Devon, around sort of the Dartmoor area, and Shetland. Another very rare breeding bird is a Slavonian grebe. So this is a bird you'll find up again in the Highlands of Scotland. And this year, actually, in 2021, we had our lowest return ever for this species. And there's lots of very keen bird watchers in the Highlands, and they visit all the regular lots on an annual basis, so very good coverage. So we can be pretty sure that the number this year is genuinely the lowest due to their hard work. And so they've done quite a lot of work on Slavonian grebes to try and understand why population has been declining. And they think it's due to quite low productivity of the birds up in Scotland, and that winter survival is really important in sustaining the population. And also that the immigration of birds from Iceland is probably also helping to sustain the current population. So really that's immigration and winter survival is absolutely key at the moment, because that productivity, the breeding success, is low. So Savvy's warbler, another example of a very rare breeding bird. You'll see that during the 70s here, actually, there's a reasonable number, sort of 10 to 20 pairs of singing males. This is how we record Savvy's warbler, singing males recorded, and then numbers really dropped off through the 90s and have started to pick up a little bit in the last few years. So there was actually a confirmed breeding record from Anglesey in 2019, where birds were seen carrying fecal sacs away from the nest. So as I say, we mainly detect singing males. They've got a very distinctive song which you can pick up, but actually going beyond that and confirming breeding is actually very rare. So looking at the rare category, then Gargany is a good example. So this is species between 30 and 300 pairs. So the average 5-year mean for Gargany is about 117 pairs. So in 2021, there were 89 pairs, of which 16 are confirmed breeding. And in Wales, just 2 pairs were recorded breeding in that year. So species that we need to sort of look out for broods later in the summer. Where I live here in East Anglia, we see a lot of male Garganies in the spring, sometimes in pairs, in very suitable wetlands such as Hockle Washes, Lake and Heath Fen just up the road here, can have 5 or 6 plus males. You think, oh great, and perhaps they'll hang around to breed, and then they just vanish. And very occasionally, later in the summer, you can see a brood of Gargany. So yeah, another species that's hard to confirm breeding. Spoonbill, this is a species that is doing incredibly well at the moment. If any of you have visited the North Norfolk coast, you'll know just how population is booming here. So you'll see that number of breeding records has sort of kind of bumbled along through the 90s with 1 or 2 pairs here and there, but it really was about 2010 when they really got a foothold and started breeding very well around Holcombe in North Norfolk. So this population has continued to do extremely well. So in 2021, 45 pairs nested, raising for 74 young. And now there's also breeding in 2021, also in Suffolk, Yorkshire and Cumbria. So as I say, it's a species that's it's increasing in the number of sites it's occupying and also the total number of pairs. Osprey is also at its record year in 2021 with 271 pairs recorded. So the majority of those pairs are in Scotland, so 229 pairs, 31 pairs in England, 10 pairs in Wales and 1 pair in Northern Ireland. And from the monitoring that's undertaken, we know that they fledged at least 337 young. It's a species that actually in Scotland now is becoming quite, I wouldn't say common, but there's quite a lot of them now. And actually the monitoring is starting to get more difficult because they're now quite widespread. So we're at that point where we're possibly going to actually start, lose a handle on how many pairs are nesting in Scotland. Wood sandpiper, it's a beautiful bird, isn't it? To nest up in the Highlands of Scotland, North and West Scotland in particular. And it's another species that has been doing incredibly well in the last few years, really quite an upturn from literally for sort of 1, 2, 3 pairs through the 70s and 80s. But in the last 10 years or so, you can see an increase in the number of sites occupied and also the number of pairs. We're not sure what's driving this. Possibly a little bit of observer coverage, more people being aware about actually submitting records, but maybe genuinely the species is faring better. And this is sort of one of the species that we really highlight, that people are going on holiday to Scotland, particularly to the north and west, just to be observant, just to be aware that there could be species like wood sandpiper, greenshank, and the divers nesting. And I think it's really important to say at this point when we're talking about rare breeding birds is that we're not asking you to find the nest of any of these birds. It's about using your skills as a bird watcher to watch birds, look at behaviour. Is a bird displaying? Is it singing? Is there a pair? Are they carrying food back and forth to a nest? Are they carrying fecal sacs, which is basically the droppings from young birds that they remove and take away? So all these signs which we can see just through our binoculars and telescope, they give us the information we need to know whether a pair is holding territory and indeed whether a pair is confirmed and successful. So you can certainly visit these areas and be observant and look out for these unusual, very rare breeding birds and submit the records to the county bird recorder. And that's how they feed through to the panel. So the next category includes pochard, where up to 1,000 pairs. So the average 5-year mean for Chod is 773 pairs. And this is a species that's generally increasing. I'll show you in a moment on a graph that they're declining in Scotland. In Wales in 2021, you had 22 pairs of pochard, and 7 of those were confirmed breeding. Again, it's a species that we need to sort of look quite late in the season for any broods of young. That again can be quite difficult to detect, and just it's really worth looking if you've got males hanging around in the breeding season. Just keep looking, because the females can just disappear to nest, and you think nothing's happening, but then suddenly you might find a female with a brood later on. And as you can see here on the graph, this is the trend for pochard, with Wales, the green line at the bottom, sort of fairly stable, to be honest. England is really driving that increase that we see for England and the UK, and Scotland, you can see the trend is for a decline. Your best areas are Anglesey, and in 2021 there were 19 pairs in Anglesey and 3 pairs in Carmarthenshire. So little winged plover is a species that's probably quite under-recorded, actually. In 2021, 35 pairs were recorded in Wales, 9 pairs in Breconshire, 8 pairs in East Glamorgan, and 7 pairs in Denbigh and Flintshire. These were your sort of top counties, but we know the population's much bigger than that from national surveys that BTO have run in the past. So again, it's about sort of keeping an eye out, looking for signs of breeding a pair, any mating kind of thing, and just keeping an eye on them. Then in the less scarce category, so up to 2,000 pairs, and Merlin's a nice example here, where the 5-year average is 1,165 pairs. In Wales, your total for 2021 was 14 pairs, and 10 of those were confirmed breeding. So many of the birds of prey quite well monitored through sort of raptor groups, local raptor groups across the UK, and they produce good information on an annual basis. Another example here in this category is shoveler. The 5-year mean is 1,351 pairs. In Wales, 49 pairs in 2021. I was absolutely thrilled to find a breeding shoveler on my local patch in the Brex this year. And again, as I spoke about the pochard, it's just a case of just being observant. We have shoveler throughout the winter. Then I noticed a few birds lingering into spring, as they do every year. And then I saw a male looking around. It was actually looking quite furtive, just on we have a lot of little pingos here in the Brex. And it was looking quite furtive and would sort of scuttle off as soon as I appeared. And I never saw a female, actually, for a long time. Then suddenly in the summer, I saw a female with just 1 young. And I was really, really excited by this. Actually, it's a very good local record. But I looked back over my records and realised I hadn't seen a pair together for about 2 months, actually. And it was really only that male that I was seeing on its own that's made me think possibly there was some breeding going on. So this is the trend for shoveler, again faring a bit better in recent years. Actually had 37 pairs on Anglesey, where 2 of those were confirmed, 9 pairs in Denbigh and Flintshire, and 3 pairs in Pembrokeshire. So Little Egret, this is another incredible success story. Currently, the average is just under 1,500 pairs per year, and in Wales, 153 pairs in 2021. I don't know about you, but I certainly remember seeing my first ever Little Egret. It was down on the Hale Estuary in Cornwall. I remember this is in the early 90s. I remember taking a train from Plymouth down to the Hale to see that Little Egret, and it was pretty amazing, and had no idea at that point that the species would start to build in numbers. First bred in Poole Harbour in 1996, and you can see from the graph at the top the number of pairs. It's just really exploded over the last 20 years, and the number of sites has gradually increased. So it's a species that nests generally in heronries with grey herons. They tend to nest later than herons, so if you're undertaking any heronry surveys, it's really wise to go back a little bit later and have another look for little egrets. As I say, they usually start a little bit later. We're now able to actually produce a trend for little egret through the breeding bird survey, and this mirrors quite nicely the population pattern that we see from rare breeding birds. So a whole host of other species which hold territory, occasionally breed, such as little bittern down around Hamwall. Most years there's a little bittern a male that holds territory, barks away, sings for a few days, but incredibly difficult to know what's going on there. Iberian chiffchaff, well, that's bred once in the UK, actually in Gwent in 1996. So all these things are possible. And great reed warbler, I'll mention that a little bit later. The rare breeding bird panel is also interested in non-native species, such as black swan and muscovy duck and monk parakeet. And these tend to be very under-recorded. Many bird watchers probably just don't bother recording non-native species, especially breeding, and they don't filter through the notebooks through to the county recorders. So we know for black swan there were at least 34 pairs in 2010, and more recent 2019, 9 to 16 pairs. Other exotics that we have been monitoring over years, things like Lady Amherst pheasants. I'm sure some of you up in North Wales will have gone to Halkin to look for the Lady Amherst pheasants back in the particularly sort of the 80s, late 70s and 80s. This species has really declined, and whether it was ever truly self-sustaining is another question, but numbers have really dwindled, and 2016 was the last male. Here in the Brecks, we have, or certainly had, a population of golden pheasants. I used to study them actually in the 90s here in the forest, but they've really dwindled, and that, I think now are really only sustained by illegal releases. So that gives you an example of the sort of range of species that we cover through the rare breeding birds panel. So how does it work, and what do we do with the information? So the way it works is that we get information, so we collate it from a variety of sources. And the biggest source of that is you as bird watchers who go out birding, make these observations and submit them to your county bird recorder. We also get information through licensed ringers and nest recorders, raptor study groups, RSPB reserves wardens are a really important source of data, and other amateur ornithologists. They all feed the data through to the secretary, so Mark Eaton, and he collects the information, has a bit of a job around deduplicating records to work out exactly how many males or territory we have in pairs in each year for each species. And as I say, we then produce an annual bird report and maintain the database. So really, records coming via the county recorder make up the bulk of the records we received, followed by the RSPB data, which I said is a really important source of information. Also, the information we get through the nest record scheme and the ringing scheme, very important. And there's a lot of, because the birds are ringed as young birds, and we get good information on confirmed breeding as well. So data comes in from very many sources, get information on some of the rare breeding birds, like a little tern Mediterranean gull through the seabird monitoring programme. And we can also, through your breeding bird survey, also extract some information about birds holding territory that may have been seen on the first visit and the second visit. So lots of different sources of information brought together. So how do we use that information? Well, we use it to bring data together when we're thinking about setting conservation priorities. So, for example, the birds of conservation concern, most recent one, 5. We use data from many sources, and the panel data feeds into that. And from that, we can produce the red list, the amber list. We currently have 25 species on the red list, which are rare breeding birds. And there are also former breeders that we identify, and 6 of those are rare breeding bird panel species. For example, the golden oriole, snowy owl, and serin. Another recent example of how we've been able to use the rare breeding bird panel data is through your Birds of Conservation Concern assessment for Wales Bot 4. This was published at the end of 2022 and published in Milvus in 2023 in the journal. And again, this brings together sources of data from Breeding Bird Survey, webs, atlases, and of course the Rare Breeding Bird Panel. We reviewed the status of 220 species in both the breeding and the winter. And from that, we were able to come up with the latest red and amber list for Wales. So, as I say, there's been 4 assessments in Wales, starting in 2002 through to 2022. And you'll see, sadly, these rings here and the proportion and number of red reflects the increasing number of species that have been red listed. So in that first assessment in 2002, there were 27 species which were red listed, and now there's 60 in 2022. And likewise, the amber list has risen from 68 to 91. And we find that 5 of the species are amber listed because Wales holds more than 50% of the UK breeding population. Species I've highlighted in blue here are also rare breeding bird panel species. So chough, 79% of the UK population is found in Wales. And as you know, you have hugely important populations of Manx shearwater on Bardsey, for example, and other islands, and pied flycatchers, goshawk, and finch. And you know what we found in the red list this time is that there are many species that are in serious trouble, including black grouse, merlin, hen harrier, ring-ouzel, and windchat. So we can also feed rare breeding bird panel data into other assessments of conservation, the state of nature, and the state of the UK's birds, all feature articles or assessments using the rare breeding bird panel data. And we can also use the panel data to assess conservation action. So the bitten's a really nice example here. And you'll probably be familiar with the story of the bittern. It was, once a widespread species in the suitable habitat. Then by 1885, it became extinct, and then started to get established again in the 30s through to the 50s. But by 1997, there were just 11 booming males left. And the fantastic work of the RSPB in restoring habitat, particularly through raising water levels in reed beds and controlling scrub, and of course the creation of new wetland habitats, has really seen the status of the species change. So you can now see that we're heading towards the 300 booming males per year level, which is just incredible to think back to the 11 that we had in 1997. So in those early years of establishment, again, there was a lot of effort put into confirming whether pairs were breeding. But since then, the monitoring has reduced a little bit. We still have a very good handle on the number of booming males each year, but less effort goes into confirming breeding. This is RSPB data that's really forming this graph, because most of the birds, all of them, most of the birds are on protected areas such as nature reserves. In Wales in 2021, there were 2 sites on Anglesey with 1 confirmed pair and 7 other pairs. And in Gwent, there was 1 site with 2 confirmed pairs and 2 other pairs. So it's great to see Bittern starting to do quite well in Wales too. So how does the rare breeding bird panel data fit into this bigger picture? So we're very blessed here in the UK to have a wealth of bird monitoring schemes, and many of which I'm involved in here at BTO, and we run in collaboration with others. So we're able to run schemes that monitor the most widespread species and common species like wren, through to the rarest like purple sandpiper here. And if you squint hard at your screen, you might just be able to see an adult purple sandpiper on a rock, and 2 young just crouched down in the back. There's just really 1 pair of purple sandpipers nesting each year in the Highlands. I've no idea where they are, and I don't think I'd ever find them because it's a very big place. It's the Cairngorms Plateau. So as I say, we have a wealth of schemes that monitor the birds in Britain, in the UK, from Breeding Bird Survey, which monitors about 117 species annually, and the Seabird Monitoring Programme, which monitors 25 species. So as I say, this is up to the most common and widespread of wren, around 13 million pairs. Then on top of that, we have additional surveys which are run periodically. So BTO this year has been running a woodcock survey in conjunction with the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust, and RSPB lead on these single species surveys. So this year has been a national hen harrier survey. And through these special surveys, often targeted at species in habitats we don't cover very well through these monitoring programs such as BBS and seabirds, but also birds which we need special methods because they display or road, like in the case of woodcock, in the evening when we're not doing our bird surveys. So special surveys led by RSPB for capercaillie revealed that we're down to just 582 individuals. A survey a couple of years ago of turtle dove showed we're now down to just 2,100 pairs. And more recently, a survey of willow tits, again led by RSPB, showed where we've got about 5,500 pairs. And actually, this has been an increase in what we thought we had. And consequently, willow tits now removed from Rare Breeding Bird Panel list. So this is how the Rare Breeding Bird Panel fits in. We monitor those rarest of the birds up to species with populations of up to 2,000 pairs. So as I say, we have this wealth of schemes and funding from a variety of conservation agencies and RSPB. So yeah, a really big thank you to all of those that are able to fund the monitoring here in the UK. We have species like Mediterranean gull, which are just sort of teetering on the edge of coming off our panel list. So we generally have just over 2,000 pairs each year of med gull. You've got 9 pairs in Wales in 2021, but actually it's not particularly well monitored outside of the Rare Breeding Bird Panel at the moment. So we get a very good flow of information through the county recorders to the panel. But the information feeding through to the Seabird Monitoring Programme actually is not so good at the minute. That's something we hope to rectify. Avocet is another species that's again around that 2,000 mark. At the moment, 59 confirmed pairs at 3 sites in Wales in 2021. But we need to have annual monitoring better established before we take it off the panels list. Then there's species like lesser spotted woodpecker, which we used to be able to produce trends through our breeding bird survey. Actually, the population is now dwindled that we're unable to produce robust trends anymore. So we do really rely on, we've added it to the panels list and now rely on your records as bird watchers feeding through to the recorders and coming to the panel. We actually don't have a very good estimate of how many pairs of lesser spot there are at the moment. The estimates range from 300 up to 1,000 pairs. So we can also use the panel data to enable research. And a very nice example was a paper published in British Birds a few years ago on the history of breeding marsh warblers in Britain. This was very much led by the bird watchers down in Worcestershire, which monitored the population there for many years. So we do give out information on rare breeding bird panel, obviously to people who are doing genuine research. And obviously there's lots of liaison around confidential records before we make that data available to them. We can also use the information to look at changes in range. And this is quite an interesting one for quail. And the graph shows the average latitude of all records of quail from 1986 to 2011. And what we see here is in more recent years, the average latitude has actually been increasing. And for 2014, 45% of all quail records came from the northern half of Britain. We might, expect that quail is actually a bird that arrives from Africa and is more likely to be found in southern England. Actually, we're seeing quite the opposite with our records. And we can use the data in a host of other ways, such as the Bird Atlas. Most recently, it was used in the European Breeding Bird Atlas, published a couple of years ago, through data requests. So just recently, we've been helping Natural England with notifying the Penwith Moors down in Cornwall as a site of special scientific interest. So that's been a very good use of panel data. There's a wealth of information that you can explore on the website. We have this Explore report facility, and you can go along and get summarised information just as you do in the British Birds paper. There's no raw data there at all. It's all summarised by county and site. So thinking about Wales, particularly, part of our paper for British Birds, we had a look at the sort of geographical spread of rare breeding birds. And we find, perhaps not surprisingly, that Highland and Norfolk are our top two counties for diversity, each with over 100 rare breeding bird monitored species. Highland's obviously a vast region covering many different habitats, from coastal to the uplands and the montane, high tops with very specialist breeding bird populations. And Norfolk, we have a great diversity of habitats as well, through heathlands, wetlands, and sort of coastal marshes. And you can see places like Kent and northeast Scotland not too far behind us. So in terms of Wales, if we rank the counties by the number of native species, this is rare breeding birds, number of native rare breeding bird species, Gwent tops your list with 49 species, followed by Carnarvonshire with 45 species, Anglesey 44, East Glamorgan, down to Radnorshire with 22 species. We can also look at this in terms of most important counties by combined population size. And again, Gwent comes out top here, followed by Denbigh and Flint, Carnarvon, Pembrokeshire, and Anglesey in fifth. So some of the species in Wales, I think you have really sort of important populations for. Goshawk, you have in 2021, 146 pairs of goshawk. England's over 600 and Scotland over 200 pairs. This is a species that you can see that UK line in blue has really been driven by the trend in England, where they're doing incredibly well in recent years. Wales is the green line, which is fairly stable, actually, slight increase perhaps, but no dramatic change. And again, Scotland, they're increasing. Here in the Brecks now, where I live, we have about 40 pairs in Thetford Forest, and really quite remarkable turnaround in fortunes in the time that I've been living here. Wales also has an important population of hen harrier, 41 pairs in 2021, paired with 34 pairs in England and just shy of 300 pairs in Scotland. And Northern Ireland hosts 17 pairs. Chough, well, this is your top bird. Wales has 278 pairs in 2021. It's generally a pretty well monitored species, so you've got good information coming out here. And you can see that Carnarvon is top county with 98 pairs, Pembrokeshire 87, Anglesey 42 pairs. So yes, such an important species for Wales. So just going to move on and talk about some of the gaps in knowledge. So that's Birds of Conservation Concern 4 for Wales, really highlighted some species that we're lacking knowledge in. Shorted owl was identified as one of its species. So I've just pulled out, this is for Wales, the number of species, the number of pairs in the last 5 years. So 2021, there were 5 pairs of shorted owl reported, 15 pairs in 2020. Pembrokeshire and Radnorshire, your top counties. Likewise, long-eared owl, perhaps that's one of the species in the UK that we know the least about as a breeding bird, I'd say. 5 pairs in Wales in 2021, 13 pairs in 2020. Gwent and Radnorshire, your top counties. These are really difficult species. Here in Thetford Forest, we have a small population of long-eared owls and mainly detect them by listening out for successful pairs later in the summer. So listening out for the young calling, that squeaky gate sound that you can hear. I've had absolutely no success listening out for calling adults in the spring, even doing proper playback surveys here in the forest. Just haven't been able to detect them. I wonder if the population is just quite thinly spread here and the adults don't call a lot. That's possible, one reason. So just looking at the distribution of those species, this is from the Bird Atlas from 2007 to 11. And you can see actually at that time, where the confirmed breeding was, the big dots, probable and possible breeding of shorted owl was in Wales, and likewise for long-eared owl. So definitely thinly spread throughout Wales, but quite possibly even under-recorded for the Atlas, especially long-eared owl. So I really do recommend, if you get the opportunity for any stands of wood, quite a wide range of habitats they can be found in, often in coniferous woodlands, but not always. Go out sort of in mid to late summer listening for that squeaky gate call, see if you can find any. This graph just shows the trends in recent years for long-eared and shorted owl, so very similar patterns, almost certainly relating to food availability. Red-breasted merganser is a species actually we know very little about, I think, as a breeding bird. We identified it as a candidate for Rare Breeding Bird Panel just a few years ago, added it to the list. So in Wales in 2021, 18 pairs were submitted, 21 pairs in 2018, and Merioneth being your best county. The fantastic birds in Wales suggests there's probably fewer than 100 pairs, so we are definitely on an annual basis, really under-recording this species. And again, this is what we found in the Bird Atlas, so mainly up in North Wales and Northwest Wales is the stronghold for red-breasted mergansers. I think this is where part of the concern around the whole sort of breeding population stems from. If we look at the change back to the 1960s, early 70s, that first breeding atlas, all the sort of black downward pointing arrows are the losses since that first atlas, and there's not been very many gains. So there's definitely been an overall decline across the UK in the number of breeding red-breasted mergansers. As I mentioned earlier, for willow tits, actually the population is higher than we thought due to that national survey a few years ago in 2019 that identified got the new population estimate for, and the big count for Wales in 2019, 234 pairs, was driven by that intensive effort for the survey. So again, it's another species to really keep a listen out for and keep sort of annual monitoring at a good level. Hawfinch, again, another species that BOC assessment identified we have quite poor information on in Wales. So 2021, there were 27 pairs in Wales. The local study in 2018 down in Gwent, a lot of intensive effort, found 101 pairs. So outside of those sort of technically rare breeding birds, there are a whole host of other species that BOC4 assessment found we were really short of data. For example, nightjar. We're hopefully planning a heathland survey in 2025, funding permitted, and that should allow us to get some new information on the distribution numbers of nightjar. But actually, waders in general, we were lacking sort of recent information, particularly for snipe. Rock pipit, well, who knows how many rock pipits breed in the UK? It's one of those really, really difficult species to monitor. I don't think anybody really looks at them very hard, counts them very carefully. So I think this would make a great local study if you're around the coast and able to make regular visits and start sort of mapping the distribution of pipits and start looking at year-to-year changes. And crossbill, this is another species that is very difficult to census. We don't get good information through our breeding bird survey. It's just not common enough. So again, records of these kind of species feeding through to the county recorder is really important. And again, here in the Brecks, we have the largest lowland forest in the UK, huge amount of forest. I think in the last 2 years, I've seen 5 crossbills, and we're just having a period where there's just no crossbills here in the forest at all. And other years, they breed commonly and widespread across the forest. So fascinating species, and I hope they return soon and we can get to look at them a bit more often and record their breeding. So I'm just going to sort of finish off by thinking about some of the rarest of the breeding birds that we have had here in the UK. So the wryneck, this was last confirmed breeding in the Highlands in 2002. When I just found my piece of paper here that Tommy recorded here, I think it was that's right. It was a nest with young found in 2002. Golden oriole was last confirmed breeding here in 2009. Actually, this was Lakenheath Fen in Suffolk, near from here. We have had occasional birds return since, and claims in more recent years, but no breeding since 2009. And Kentish plover, 1979 was the last time that Kentish plover bred here, and this was a pair up in Lincolnshire, where young fledged from that site. So it's been a long time since Kentish plover bred here. Montague's harrier, now this is a really concerning species. It's become, you can see from the graph here, that it was a regular, always a scarce breeding bird, 10 to 15 pairs annually. But in the last few years, you can see how the graph has tailed off. So actually now we think we've had 4 blank years of no breeding here in the UK. So we've published reports for 2020, 21, which confirm there was no breeding for Montague's harrier. We're in the process of collating records for 2022 and then 2023. But from what we know, there's been no breeding in those years either. So we have been getting a few Montague harriers returning to the UK, mainly males that are holding territory for a short time and displaying, but just not attracting any females. So going to talk about a few oddities now, really. So Hoopoe, pair bred actually in Montgomeryshire in 1996, fledging 3 young. That was the first breeding record for Wales, and the first confirmed breeding record since 1977, when actually 4 pairs bred. Then remarkably this year, a pair of bred in Leicestershire. Another species that's had sort of sporadic breeding is bluethroat. Now, we do get bluethroats occurring here in the UK every year as passage migrants. We get the red-spotted form and the white-spotted form. But there's just only been 4 confirmed breeding records of 5 pairs, and a record from 1968, which predates a panel. So there's been records in 1985 in the Highlands, and in 1995 also in the Highlands. These are often in quite wooded habitat. Really interesting, in 1996, there was 2 pairs of white spotted on thorn moors in Yorkshire, and both those pairs fledged young. I think one of the pairs even had 2 broods, and there was also a 3rd male holding territory there. So this little colony formed in that year. It was a year that there was actually quite a big influx of white-spotted blue throats into the country. Then more recently, in 2016, there was breeding in the Highlands again. So that 1996 record, whereas the others have been in quite wooded habitat, that was up on the moors, in sort of a treeless treeless habitat up on the hills. There's some fantastic photos of 2016 birds here, which show the adults and also some of the fledged young. So there's been quite a lot of wacky records of breeding here in the UK. So one of these is spotted sandpiper, which bred on the Isle of Skye in 1975. And this was nicely documented by the observer at the time, Gordon Wilson, who submitted the record. There was 1 pair with a nest with 4 eggs. And if you look carefully at the photograph on the left, you can just make out the adult spotted sandpiper on a log there. And I think what appeared to have happened is when they made a nest, laid 4 eggs, and then during a period of heavy rain, the nest flooded. And under license, the eggs were collected and taken to the Natural History Museum in Scotland. And actually 2 of the eggs were opened up to investigate the contents, where there were partially developed embryo. So since then, there's been 7 records of single spotted sandpipers in suitable breeding habitat or part of mixed pairs with common sandpiper. We've also had very unusual records of pair of broadbill sandpipers in the 1980s, holding territory and displaying and going down to the ground like they were making a nest scrape, but nothing came of that. So yeah, some really amazing and unexpected records. There's been 13 species that have shown breeding evidence, but only part of mixed pairs. They're mainly being duck species, such as ringneck duck, for example, and black duck that try to hybridize. So some examples here are sort of black kite, which hybridized with the red kite in Highland in 2006. So prior to that, this black kite summered for a few years, then hybridized, and 2 hybrid young fledged. The ringbill gull hybridized with common gull in Perth and Kinross, been fairly regular since 2009. And although eggs are laid most years, no chicks have ever been seen. So bottom left is killdeer. This is a North American species, which paired with a ring plover on Shetland in 2007. There was lots of distraction display, but breeding wasn't confirmed. And finally, the final example here is Northern Harrier, which paired with a hen harrier on Orkney in 2016. They laid eggs. The breeding failed after the eggs hatched, it seems. So there's some examples of mixed pairings. Another very odd record is long-tailed skewer. We might be very lucky to see one of these fly past on a sea watch. But they bred in Angus in 1980. They held a territory, apparently sort of dive bombing, as you may have seen skewers do on breeding grounds. And a clutch of eggs was laid on coastal moorland habitat. It seems the eggs were predated, and the following year just a single bird returned. Since then, there's been summering on Shetland, actually even in more recent years, but nothing more than that. So what about the future? What could be next? I mentioned great reed warbler earlier. So this is a species that every year we get birds holding territories for 5 days or more, singing away. We've not knowingly ever had a pair of great reed warblers, but nest building has been noted twice in Kent. So quite possibly it may be a species to watch out for the future. Blythe's reed warbler is another species that is increasingly, it used to be a very rare bird, and now we get some records in spring of males singing and holding territory. So that's another possible species perhaps to listen out for. And just thinking even further afield, maybe even red-flanked bluetail is a possibility. It's not completely out of the question. If we look at one of those European breeding bird atlases, we can see how the species is now established, particularly in Finland, and expanding its range all the time, sort of westward. So it's not completely out of the question. I also wonder about black-winged kites. We had our first 1 or 2 records this year. The first one in Wales, and then a bird in East Anglia later on. This is a species that's doing incredibly well in Europe, moving northwards, regularly holding territory in the Low Country. So perhaps, who knows, in sort of 5 to 10 years, we may find ourselves with black-winged kites nesting here too. And just for fun, with all those black and white warblers on Bardsey this year, including a male and a female, well, wouldn't that be amazing? So just to finish up, I hope that gives you a good background to what the Rare Breeding Bird panel is about and how you can help species that we've lacking information on. And I think the key message is just to be really alert when you're out bird watching. Think about the possibility that a species may be singing, holding territory, displaying, and think about the possibility that it may be breeding. Of course, safety of the birds, welfare of birds is always first. So remember the wildlife legislation and the Birdwatchers Code of Conduct. And really can't stress this enough, is about submitting all your breeding records to your county recorder, and they feed through to the panel. So yeah, the county recorder is really, really key here to collecting all the information that feeds through to the panel. Use whatever you use for submitting records, BirdTrack, Excel spreadsheets direct to the database, and whatever is a preferred method locally. And include breeding evidence, make a note of how many singing males, any distraction display, that kind of thing. It's all really good information. And do be as precise as you can with the location details, just remembering that the database is confidential, and the better information we have about the precise location is, we can then sort of remove duplicates from the database and actually really help protect a species if need be. So thanks very much for listening. It's been nice to talk to you, and yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dawn. That was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. So much in that to ponder and take in. I'm sure there'll be quite a few questions. And if any of you would like to start it off, please do.
It's funny. Thanks, Dawn. Brilliant talk. Thank you very much. Coming on to you saying red-backed bluetail. I know earlier on in the autumn, I'm not sure if it was late September or maybe just into October, but I think there's one in mid Wales, like in a small pine plantation, and it does get you thinking, after sort of seeing them in Scandinavia, in the pine plantations there, you sort of think, crikey, I mean, anything could be going on in mid Wales, like where no one goes, and who knows? Yeah, obviously, food for thought. I know, like on Anglesey, trying to work out the number of breeding red-breasted mergansers and rock pipits and things like that. I think we'd have to be a conscious combined effort of doing the coastal footpath with some volunteers at the right time of year to try and nail those ones down. But yeah. Well, yeah. Thank you very much.
That's okay.
Thanks, Steve. Any other questions?
Can I add one? Hi Dawn, thanks for hi, thanks for that. Really good talk. Really good reminder to us all about the value of making sure we submit the data. And actually, just picking up on Steve's idea, I think Steve, your idea of doing a coordinated coastal red-breasted merganser survey around Anglesey is brilliant. I think we should do that. But anyway, the thing I was going to ask, and I'm not sure when you said this, you said we, and I'm not sure whether you said we with an RBBP hat or a BTO hat. But you mentioned nightjar in there as maybe part of a heathland survey, and obviously almost all the nightjars in Wales are actually in plantation forestry. So we wouldn't pick them up on a classic heathland survey. So I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about that. Is it heathland or is it nightjar?
So yeah. Hi Julian. It's we as in BTO, RSPB, and country agencies. I'm thinking of collecting new information on nightjar, woodlark, and Dartford warbler, and they're calling it heathland because that's where the other two species are mainly. But it will be if it goes ahead, it'll be nightjar in all habitats.
Oh, that's great. Okay, that's really good. That's really good to know. Excellent.
And particularly actually for places like Scotland where they're probably really under recorded as well, and often in here in the Brexer in Clearfields and coniferous areas, and we don't have a great deal of heath here.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. No, great talk tonight. Really enjoyed it.
That's okay.
Thanks, Judy. Thank you. Dawn, can I just ask you a little bit more about geographical trends for species? You mentioned the quail, and that was quite surprising, what a high percentage were in the northern half of Britain. Are there any general trends that you can glean from looking at right across the data in terms of our rare breeding birds and their performances?
Well, I suppose a trend in more recent years, I talked about little egrets, but I didn't really mention cattle egrets, great white egrets, which a lot of species coming into the UK, first breeding in I think it's 2008 for cattle egret, 2010 for great whites. So these at the moment are predominantly in southern counties, in counties with a lot of wetland creation in recent years. So glossy ibis bred for the first time 2 years ago in Cambridgeshire. So I think the southern counties have a lot of those sort of rare breeding herons and egrets. Quite a tricky one actually, Nigel, because obviously habitat comes into it a lot here. So a lot of Scotland has got a lot of uplands, is obviously very important for many species as well. But I think the wetland habitats that have been created and restored in southern England are very important for many rare breeding birds.
Has it come as a bit of a surprise that things like wood sand are increasing? Might you have expected them to be declining with climate change, or is it just so much more complicated than that?
So we don't really know what's going on with wood sandpipers. It could partly be to do just actually a better flow of data from people seeing them, but it does seem that there is genuine increase in some areas that are quite well watched each year, that there's just more birds. As you say, climate change is going to be an interesting one, isn't it, to see how all our species, but the rare breeding birds may respond.
With the red-breasted mergansers, is there any evidence that increase in gooseanders is a problem or not?
Not that I'm aware of, Nigel. It's not a pair of species I'm very familiar with at all in the breeding season. Although bizarrely, about 10 years ago, we had a pair of goosander nests here in the middle of Thetford,
right?
Which is quite out of range. Quite scarce wintering birds here, really. So that was a real surprise when a brood appeared on the river, literally just outside BTO, right under our noses.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Dawn. I noticed, because obviously you keep an eye on alien species like black swans and things like that. And I noticed in was it this month's BB about monk parakeets. Are they being eradicated? Because I'm sure I saw a comment that they were like ruddy ducks have been eradicated. Is there Is there a program at the moment to stop the monk parakeet population from blossoming like ringneck parakeet has?
I think there has been a programme, Stephen. Again, it's something I don't particularly know much about, or indeed how successful it's been, but it is a species that authorities are keeping tabs on. Yeah, I've never seen one actually in the UK. And been to look, but yeah, I think you're right there.
Okay, thanks.
We haven't got any questions in the chat, but we have got a thank you, Dawn. Such a thorough talk covering much information with many Welsh details from Roberta. And Joe says, hello, I'm new to birding. Very interesting. Thank you very much.
It's okay, my pleasure.
Thanks, Gary. That's great. Dawn, is there anything equivalent to the rare breeding panel elsewhere in Europe?
There is actually not well established, going for so long, or yeah. So kind of yes and no. There are some countries. Germany especially has a program of rare breeding birds, quite different actually. I think I saw a talk once about Germany, and they give individuals squares to cover. To monitor the rare breeding birds, a bit like our BBS, I suppose, but I think it was a bigger area, and they collect information that way rather than our way of collating records at the UK scale. But less so, really. I mean, many countries, as I say, we're so lucky here in the UK to have such established monitoring like the BBS and Wetland Bird Survey have been going for so long that in other parts of Europe, especially Eastern Europe, they're only just setting up their regular common bird monitoring. Places like Moldova and Malta, they're just really at the very start of their monitoring journey. So rare breeding birds are probably quite low down their list when they don't even know what common species are doing.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
That's okay.
Well, Dawn, I'm sure you've had another long day, extending long into this evening, but much to our benefit and to your credit, this was a fantastic talk. It was just so full of info, really world-class info, objective, comprehensive, covering so many species on all of Britain with a nice nod to Wales. Thank you very much for that. It's just so stimulating to have this information flowing out of an evening about the birds we love, this hard scientific information. And that combination of info and maps is just so stimulating for getting out there and recording more, as Julian said, and Steve. And I'm so glad you made the point to get out there and to record in as much detail as possible and submit the information either direct to the recorders or to BTO or one of the other major agencies. It's so vital, and you've shown how that information can be used to track the performance of birds over 50 years. And it's a great credit to all the organizations involved and indeed the individuals involved. It really is such a big team effort, a great example of citizen science, but it all needs careful coordination, and that's what the Rare Breeding Panel has done wonderfully well over 50 years. And it's just so good to have a talk about it tonight in its 50th year from you as chair of the panel. Thank you ever so much.
That's okay, thank you.
I'm sure we're all going to go to bed tonight thinking, I need to know more about rock pipits and all that sort of stuff. I know I will, and I think, I hope that it shows through in the coming years here in Wales, and we put more effort into objectively and strategically recording birds, because as we all know, that's what the basis of conservation is all about. You need all that data, and it's been shown time and time again how valuable that is. So thank you for bringing it to life tonight, and good luck with all your work. Don't overdo it. Goodness knows how you keep on top of it all. You deserve every support you can get. And thanks for coming to Wales last weekend, and thanks for being with us this evening, very exclusively. We feel very privileged. Thanks an awful lot from Bird Group.
No,